Why do you keep running such an unstable business out of that old apartment? Why don't you get a proper job already? Allison, I'm saying this for your own good. Only the words my younger sister, Vanessa Morgan, spat out while idly toying with her crystal glass echoed through the room. This was a private dining room at an upscale restaurant my mother, Natalie Morgan, loved to frequent. 6 years had passed since my father died, and every family gathering had inevitably become a place where my so-called failures were assumed and relentlessly ridiculed. Vanessa had recently been promoted to senior associate at one of New York's most prestigious law firms. Dressed in a perfectly tailored navy suit, with her hair immaculately styled and a triumphant smile on her lips, she looked every bit the image of success. To her, success meant visible titles and inner status that drew envy from everyone around her. Vanessa is right. How long do you plan to cling to that crumbling building? My mother looked at me with a cold, cutting stare. The $35,000 your father left you was supposed to be capital to start a real business. Yet it still hasn't shown any results. That money should have been managed by someone who understands its value, like Vanessa. What you're doing is no different from playing in the mud. I quietly placed my napkin on my lap and looked straight at the two of them. The place they sneered at as a rundown apartment was actually a historic red brick building along the Hudson River, one that still retained the atmosphere of the late 19th century. It was true that when I first bought it, the pipes were rusted through, the walls were peeling, and it was a property on the verge of ruin that no one wanted to touch. But I could see it. The genuine beauty sleeping behind those soot-darkened bricks. For 6 years, I painted the walls with my own hands, persuaded local craftsmen to restore the original decorative details, and discreetly integrated modern smart home technology into the traditional design. It was not the kind of symbolic success Vanessa chased, but something tangible I could pass on to the next generation. That was my pride. Thank you for worrying about me, but the business is going well, I answered briefly. Vanessa let out an exaggerated sigh. Going well? Don't lie to us. With a building that old, the maintenance costs alone would put you in the red. Dad never imagined his money would be wasted like this. That was a loan, and you don't even show any intention of paying it back. A loan. I frowned. When my father handed me that money, he looked me straight in the eyes and said, "This is an investment in your dream. Of course, there's no need to repay it. Make the path you believe in a reality." But my mother and Vanessa clearly didn't see it that way. That's right. It's a perfectly legitimate debt, Allison, my mother said, as if to drive the point home. We have proof of that, you know. You should know your place. Don't you think the best way to save yourself from further embarrassment is to sell that apartment and let Vanessa handle the asset management? I did not miss the unmistakable glint of possessiveness shining deep in Vanessa's eyes. She did not want to help me. She simply wanted to drag me down as a failure and prove that she alone was the family's one legitimate heir. That night, with a sense of an approaching storm weighing heavily on me, I drove back to my apartment. At the time, I still could not fully grasp that this was a declaration of war from the very family that sought to destroy me. 2 weeks after that unpleasant dinner, I greeted the morning as usual at my apartment, Leisurewood Terrace, which stood on a hill overlooking the Hudson River. To me, this building was not merely real estate, but the very embodiment of the dream my late father had believed in. With a freshly brewed cup of coffee in hand, I gazed out the window. That peaceful moment, however, was suddenly shattered by a heavy, ominous knock. When I opened the door, a man with a blank expression stood there. "Is this Allison Morgan?" He held out a court envelope. The instant it was placed in my hand, a sickening premonition ran through my fingertips. I broke the seal and checked the contents, nearly feeling dizzy. Complaint for loan repayment. Plaintiffs, Natalie Morgan and Vanessa Morgan. The contents were far more malicious than I could have imagined. Jonathan Morgan, the deceased father, lent the defendant, Allison Morgan, $35,000 as startup capital. This was not a gift, but an interest-bearing loan. The total sum of $47,000, including unpaid interest, must be repaid immediately. Attached was a copy of a single document, a loan agreement. There, side by side, were my father's signature and what appeared to be my own distorted signature. This can't be. It's a lie. My heart began to pound violently. On the day my father gave me that money, there had not been a single piece of paperwork. He simply took my hand, smiled, and said, "Trust your intuition." This contract had to be a fabrication. With trembling fingers, I called my mother. "Mom, what is this supposed to mean? Taking me to court? Are you really going to ignore the promise you made to Dad?" What came through the receiver was my mother's voice, cold and utterly devoid of mercy. "Oh, so it finally reached you. Your father spoiled you far too much, Allison, but I have no intention of indulging your little mud play any longer with that $35,000. Vanessa could have made far higher status investments. Once that apartment is seized, you'll finally admit your own incompetence and come crawling back home, won't you?" Seized? That's right. Once the ruling is issued, that rundown apartment of yours will be put up for auction. Vanessa handled everything. She's a professional lawyer, after all. You don't stand a chance. Behind my mother's words lay not only contempt for me, but blind faith in Vanessa. She had perfectly played the role of the successful daughter my mother desired while scheming behind the scenes to take everything from me. If you're going that far, then I'll prepare to fight as well. Don't put on a brave face. You don't even have the money left to hire a lawyer. She spat the words out and hung up. I set the receiver down and stared at the brick walls I had protected for so long. What my father gave me was not just $35,000 in cash. He gave me the pride to stand on my own 2 feet. Tarnishing that was something I could not allow, even if it came from my own family. "Vanessa, if you're willing to stake your career as a lawyer on this, then I'll face you head on." I immediately went to see Daniel Brooks, a lawyer who had been an old friend of my father. In his quiet office, far removed from the hustle and bustle of New York, he studied the complaint and the copy of the contract, peering through his reading glasses. "This is awful. It looks very much like Jonathan's signature, but something feels off." Daniel leaned back deeply into his chair and let out a sigh. The law firm Vanessa belongs to is notorious for using any means necessary to win. She's desperate to prove she is the family's leader through this case. Proving these documents are forged will be no easy task. I know, but I don't want my promise with my father to be defiled. Very well. First, you need to thoroughly comb through any records from when your father gave you the money, bank transaction histories, emails from that time, even diaries. Jonathan was a meticulous man. There must be something left behind that describes the nature of that money. Taking Daniel's advice to heart, I began a lonely battle to search for evidence. During the day, I immersed myself in managing and restoring the apartment. At night, I shut myself away in the small study tucked into one corner of the building. There, several cardboard boxes were stacked high, boxes I had kept as keepsakes when my father died 6 years earlier. My mother and Vanessa had laughed and said, "Why not just throw that old junk out?" But I could never bring myself to do it. Inside were my father's cherished fountain pen, old ledgers, and the history books he loved to read. Carefully opening each dust-covered box one by one felt like quietly resuming a conversation with my father, a sacred and solemn time. Vanessa had always been the type who could never tolerate anything that threatened her status. Even when we were children, if one of my drawings won a prize in a competition, she dismissed it as luck and then obsessively worked the following year to win an even bigger award. For her, life always had to be a victory measured only by comparison with someone else. This time, too, I was certain that her decision to sue me was not simply about money. It came from a twisted obsession to legally brand me as a failure and seize even the love and trust one had received from our father. About a week later, I finally found my father's old leather-bound diary. It was a personal memorandum he had kept faithfully until just before his death. As I turned the pages, his familiar handwriting leapt out at me. March 15, 20XX. I gave Allison $35,000. Linda will surely oppose it, but in that child's eyes, I saw the same passion I once had myself. This is an investment in her dream and in my own. No matter what others may say, I believe in her. Tucked inside the diary was a copy of an old bank transfer receipt bearing a handwritten note in my father's careful script, an investment in my daughter's dream. A gift. By the time I finished reading, tears were falling onto the pages. Clutching the diary to my chest, I called Daniel. I found it. My father's true will. Even so, Vanessa was a formidable opponent. The contract she submitted bore a forged signature so meticulously crafted that even experts would struggle to tell it apart from the real one. On top of that, she set another trap in preparation for the trial, a mandatory inspection of my apartment by a court-appointed real estate appraiser. She believed that if the apartment received a low valuation, I would be treated as an insolvent debtor with no ability to repay, making it far easier for them to seize the property. I accepted the challenge in silence. The reality they believed in versus the truth I'd spent 6 years building with my own hands. The day when the answer would be revealed was drawing closer. The day of the trial. As the courtroom doors opened, a cold tension hung in the air. My mother sat in the plaintiff's seat, absently fingering her pearl necklace while staring at me as if I were something filthy. Beside her sat Vanessa, her lawyer's badge gleaming proudly, her posture flawless and unwavering. A defiant smile played across her face. Today we will prove how the defendant, Allison Morgan, betrayed her family's goodwill and squandered the inheritance left by her late father, Vanessa said, her voice ringing clearly through the courtroom. Her argument was smooth, passionate, and carried a compelling force. She held up the so-called loan agreement and insisted that I had never repaid the debt once, choosing instead to run from my obligation. My father, Jonathan Morgan, was a strict businessman. There is no way he would have handed over $35,000 to an unemployed daughter without expecting something in return. This contract is proof of his rational judgment. Yet the defendant repaid that kindness with betrayal, pouring the money into worthless real estate and standing on the brink of bankruptcy. Vanessa turned toward me and hurled her words with open contempt. Allison, your illusion of a dream ends here today. The judge turned his gaze toward me. Counsel for the defense, do you have a rebuttal? Beside me, Daniel Brooks rose quietly. Yes, Your Honor. We categorically deny the authenticity of the contract submitted by the plaintiffs. Furthermore, we will present irrefutable evidence demonstrating the true intent of the late Jonathan Morgan. Daniel presented my father's diary and the bank transfer receipt. The plaintiffs have used the phrase strict businessman, but what my client's father valued above all else was trust. Please look at the entry dated March 15th in this diary. The memo field on the bank transfer record clearly contains the word gift written in the father's own handwriting. Is there any clearer evidence than this? For a brief moment, Vanessa's expression froze. But she quickly let out a derisive snort. Your Honor, an old diary could easily be fabricated. The contract I possess bears a legally binding signature. It should be obvious which one deserves your trust. Then let us discuss that signature. Daniel produced another document. We commissioned one of the nation's leading handwriting analysts to examine the signature on the plaintiff's contract. The conclusion, while the writing habits closely resemble those of the deceased, the pen pressure and ink pooling differ from his usual patterns. It was highly likely a forgery produced with exceptional precision. A murmur rippled through the courtroom. I watched the color drain from Vanessa's face. Her pride, her status as a lawyer, and her conviction that she alone was the rightful heir all began to crumble audibly. Yet the judge remained calm. The credibility of documentary evidence requires careful consideration. Now then, in connection with this lawsuit, the court has received the report from the court-ordered appraisal of the defendant's property. Let us review its contents as well. Vanessa straightened her back at once to conceal her agitation. She was still convinced of her victory. After all, to her, that apartment was nothing more than a worthless, run-down building. She believed that a low valuation would deny my ability to repay, and regardless of the contract's authenticity, I would be cornered and branded a failure. Yes, Your Honor, Vanessa said. Please read out the value of that building, which is no better than trash. That should make it even clearer who is telling the truth. The courtroom fell into a heavy silence. The judge opened the official appraisal report. The appraiser stepped up to the witness stand. I will now report the results of our investigation. The subject property, Leisurewood Terrace, located along the Hudson River, was built in 1892. Prior to our inspection, based on materials provided by the plaintiffs, we had assumed it to be a dilapidated structure little more than a ruin. However, what our on-site inspection team encountered was a scene that could only be described as a miracle in today's real estate market. Vanessa's eyebrow twitched. The defendant, Allison Morgan, spent 6 years carrying out a complete renovation of this historic building. The exterior red brick was reconstructed using mortar blended to replicate the original 19th century composition. The stained glass at the entrance was restored by a Tiffany-style workshop. Even more remarkable is the interior. Without compromising the traditional design, state-of-the-art thermal and sound insulation panels have been embedded within the walls, and a top-tier smart home system has been installed throughout every unit. The appraiser turned the page. Of particular note is the property's occupancy record. This apartment building has gained extraordinary popularity among New York's wealthy residents and artists as a word-of-mouth-only hidden retreat. The current occupancy rate is 100%. The waiting list now includes more than 50 prospective tenants. The annual rental income, calculated as net profit after expenses, amounts to $248,000. What did you say? A faint, disbelieving voice escaped from my mother's lips. Her hand trembled as it gripped the armrest. The appraiser continued. Taking into account current market trends, historical value, and profitability, the final appraisal of this asset is a market value of no less than $4 million. The courtroom erupted into an explosive roar of noise. $4 million? That's impossible. Vanessa sprang to her feet, crying out more like a scream than something befitting a lawyer. This has to be a mistake. There's no way a building that old, that looks like it's haunted, could be worth that much. She's nothing but a failure. She was supposed to have thrown Dad's money straight into the gutter. I rose slowly to my feet. Before Daniel could stop me, I stepped forward on my own and locked eyes with my sister. Vanessa, you never saw anything, did you? My quiet voice cut through her screaming and echoed across the courtroom. Have you ever once tried to imagine what I was doing in that place you sneered at as a haunted house? For 6 years, I went down into that basement every single day and wrestled with 130-year-old plumbing diagrams. On freezing winter nights, covered in soot, I polished the original bricks one by one with my own hands. While you sipped coffee in a luxurious office, I was out in the Hudson River's icy wind adjusting roof tiles. The color drained rapidly from Vanessa's face. When you started this lawsuit, I chose not to say anything on purpose. It was convenient that you believed I was a failure. But Vanessa, the annual net profit of that rundown apartment you despise exceeds $240,000, and its market value easily surpasses the salary you've spent your entire life trying to reach by chasing the partner track at your law firm. After taking a breath, I slammed another file onto Vanessa's table. And as for this contract, I'll explain it myself. Vanessa, you made a fatal mistake as a lawyer. I asked an engineer to recover every output history you forgot to delete from your firm's servers. Here is the log data from 3 months ago showing you used the Office multifunction printer to scan Dad's signature and produce this forged contract. Why do you have something like that? Because I knew just how cruel you could be when it came to protecting your status. Using Dad's signature to frame me, Vanessa, in trying so hard to win against me, you crossed the line a lawyer must never cross. I turned to my mother, who sat with her mouth half open. And you, Mom, you went along with Vanessa's lies. But what a shame. What I built over these 6 years isn't some cheap dream you could seize. It's an unshakable success, one your imagination can't even begin to catch up to. Vanessa collapsed weakly into her chair. The suit that had once been perfect was now damp with the sweat of despair. The arrogant light in her eyes had vanished, replaced by fear as her career began to crumble. The judge struck the gavel heavily. Order. Defendant Allison Morgan, the evidence you have presented suggests facts of the utmost seriousness. All eyes turned and pierced into Vanessa. There was no longer any escape. Counsel for the plaintiff, Vanessa Morgan, you are suspected of committing one of the most abhorrent acts for anyone in the legal profession, the fabrication of evidence before this court. This matter goes far beyond a mere family financial dispute and constitutes a grave challenge to the integrity of the judiciary. Accordingly, this lawsuit seeking repayment of a loan is hereby dismissed in its entirety due to the failure to establish the authenticity of the evidence. Vanessa collapsed like a puppet with its strings cut. But the judge was not finished. Furthermore, Ms. Morgan, your actions may constitute criminal offenses, including forgery of a private document and litigation fraud. This court will forward all related materials to the prosecutor's office for consideration of criminal charges. A formal recommendation will also be submitted to the State Bar Association seeking disciplinary action against you. Criminal charges? Disciplinary action. Vanessa muttered hollowly. The status of lawyer, which she had staked her entire life on obtaining, was slipping through her fingers. Her face was drained of color. When the trial ended, I stepped out into the hallway. It was packed with relatives who had been waiting eagerly for my defeat. But the words for $1 million and fabrication of evidence had leaked out and completely shifted where they stood. Allison. An aunt rushed toward me with a smile that flipped instantly. To think you turned that apartment into something so valuable. I always knew you were Arthur's daughter. We had no idea Vanessa was capable of something so terrible. That's right, Allison. If you ever run into trouble, you should always rely on your family. Even my cousins, who moments earlier had refused to meet my eyes, now crowded around me like ants swarming sugar. What I saw in their eyes was not respect for me, but desire for the $4 million that hovered behind me. I looked quietly at each of their faces. Then I spoke clearly. Don't misunderstand. I don't need any of your help. When I was polishing bricks alone, did a single one of you ever lend me a hand? You came here today to laugh at my failure. If that's the case, play that role all the way to the end. As my relatives fell silent, I stepped in front of my mother and Vanessa, who stood unsteadily. My mother wore a frightened expression. Allison, you'll let your mother rent a room in that apartment too, won't you? With Vanessa like this, how are we supposed to live? Mom, just a moment ago you called me an incompetent daughter and tried to take my home away from me. I am not your property, and you will receive not a single cent of profit from me. This is the end. Do not ever contact me again. Allison, wait. Leaving my mother's scream behind me, I walked out of the courthouse without turning around. 6 months later, a feature article appeared on the front page of the Sunday New York Times, Guardian of History, the young female entrepreneur who transformed a Hudson River ruin into one of America's most exclusive luxury properties. The article featured photographs of the beautifully restored Leisurewood Terrace, along with a detailed account of my approach to preserving historical value while maximizing profitability. The waiting list grew even longer. Among celebrities and tech moguls hoping to move in, gaining my approval had become a status symbol in itself. As my own life grew brighter, I heard from Daniel that the situation facing my mother and Vanessa was bleak. Vanessa had been permanently disbarred. The major law firm she once belonged to was considering a lawsuit for damages citing harm to its reputation. And the mansion my mother had cherished above all else was put up for auction to cover Vanessa's enormous legal fees and compensation payments. The two of them moved into a damp, cramped rental apartment in the suburbs, one that made their former habit of mocking my building as a rundown shack sound like a bad joke. For women who had lived off status and luxury as their primary nourishment, life there must have been more painful than death itself. I never wanted revenge. They had simply tried to turn my father's love into money and trample on my pride. As the price for that, they ended up spending the rest of their lives experiencing the very bottom-tier existence they had despised the most. Having severed the chains called family and gained the strength to believe in myself, I built my own place in the world with my own hands, just as my father believed I would.